Good morning, boys and girls. I'm Eleanor Hawkins, and welcome to Telestory Time. I brought along Buddy Book again this morning because many of you boys and girls have said you like him. And here he is sitting right here. And you see, this book has eyes, a big nose, and a mouth. And he wears red shoes. Inside, he says, "Hello, I'm a book, and I'm your buddy. Together we can look and find. We can laugh and sing. We can play and share. And we can read and dream." Yes, I'm Buddy Book, and I've come to tell a story time this morning to listen to some stories. And so Buddy Book's going to sit right over there while we can all listen to the story of Pinocchio. Once upon a time, there lived a poor and lonely woodcutter named Geppetto. One day, Geppetto found a fine log of wood, and he decided to make a puppet to keep him company. He carved a little boy out of the wood and called him Pinocchio. Now, Geppetto loved Pinocchio as much as if he were a real live child. He wanted to send Pinocchio to school and to bring him up properly. But Pinocchio started out as a naughty little puppet. The first thing he did as soon as he learned to walk was to run away. Now, Geppetto set out to look for Pinocchio, but he could not find him. Meanwhile, a policeman caught Pinocchio by his nose, but he wiggled away and ran back home. Now, there was no one at home because Geppetto was still out looking for him. Suddenly a voice cried, "Craw, craw." "Who said that?" asked Pinocchio in a frightened voice. "I did," said the talking cricket, crawling slowly up the wall. "Shame on boys who run away from home. You should go to school, or you will grow up to be a donkey." "Go away," shouted Pinocchio. The cricket stepped through the window and was gone. Now, Pinocchio was hungry, for he had not eaten anything all day long. He went about the room pulling out drawers, looking for something to eat. He saw something in a corner and he picked it up. It was an egg. "Now I shall have something to eat," he said. But when he broke the eggshell, a little chicken popped out. "Oh, thank you, Master Pinocchio," it said politely. "You have saved me the trouble of breaking my shell. Goodbye." And the chicken flew away. Pinocchio began to cry. "Oh dear," he said, "if only I had been good and not run away. My dear papa would be here now with something for me to eat." He sat down in front of the fireplace, stretched out his legs to warm them. He fell sound asleep, and when he woke up, his wooden feet were burned off. Oh, how Pinocchio cried. Just then Geppetto came back. Oh, he was overjoyed to see his little boy again, and he kissed him. "Now I can make you new feet," he said, "but then you would run away again." "No, I won't," Pinocchio promised. "I'll be good, and I'll go to school." So Geppetto took his tools and made 2 nice new feet for Pinocchio, and then he made some clothes for him. But there was no money for a school book for Pinocchio. So Geppetto went out and sold his overcoat to buy a school book. Pinocchio kissed his dear father and started off to school. Now, he really meant to be good. But alas, on the way to school, Pinocchio passed a big tent. There was a puppet show going on inside. Pinocchio sold his school book to a peddler for a ticket to the show, and in he went. A showman called Fire Eater saw Pinocchio, and he said, Bring that puppet here. He is made of fine, dry wood and will make a good blaze for my roast." The cook brought Pinocchio, who was wiggling and screaming. When Fire Eater saw Pinocchio cry, he felt sorry for him. Pinocchio told him all of his troubles and how poor Geppetto had sold his overcoat to buy him a school book. Fire Eater said, "Here are 5 gold pieces. Buy your father a new overcoat and yourself a new school book." Pinocchio started down the road toward home. He jingled the 5 gold pieces in his pocket. But alas, he met with some bad companions on the way. He stopped to talk to 2 beggars, a fox and a cat. "Look, look, I am rich," said Pinocchio, pulling the 5 gold pieces out of his pocket. The fox and the cat opened their eyes wide. "Well, now what will you do with all that money?" they asked. "Oh, I'm going to buy my father a new overcoat and myself a school book." "Oh, it's silly to go to school," said the fox. "Well, you must be hungry. Why don't you have dinner with us at the inn?" "Crack, crack," said a small voice nearby among the weeds. "Don't listen to bad companions." Now Pinocchio knew it was the voice of the talking cricket, but he did not listen. Instead, he went with the fox and the cat. Now the fox had rabbit stew, the cat had fried fish, and Pinocchio had spaghetti. But Pinocchio fell asleep with his plate of spaghetti half eaten. When he woke up, the fox and the cat were gone. He had to pay a gold coin to the innkeeper for all their dinners. "Anyway, I have the other 4 gold coins," said Pinocchio to himself. Now it was past midnight when Pinocchio left the inn. As he walked along the dark road, he heard the sound of running feet behind him. In the moonlight, Pinocchio saw 2 creatures dressed in black running after him. They wore black sacks which covered them all over. Only their eyes gleamed through holes cut in the sacks. They were the fox and the cat in disguise. "Give us your money! Give us your money!" they hissed. But Pinocchio ran and ran. He jumped across a little brook. Now the fox and the cat could not jump because they were tied up in their sacks. So they landed splash right in the middle of the brook. Now soon it was morning. As Pinocchio ran through the woods, he saw a little white house. A lovely fairy with gold hair was sitting in the window. She let him in and asked, "What seems to be your trouble?" Pinocchio told the fairy about everything that had happened since he had left home to go to school. "Well, where are the rest of the gold coins?" she asked. Pinocchio had the gold coins in his pocket, but he lied to the fairy. I lost them," he said. As soon as he said this, his nose began to grow longer. "Where did you lose the gold coins?" asked the fairy. "Oh, in the forest," lied Pinocchio. Now at this second lie, his nose grew even longer. "Then we will go and find them," said the fairy. "No, no," said Pinocchio quickly. I swallowed them." Now at this third lie, his nose grew so long that it reached clear across the room and out of the window. Pinocchio could not go through the door with it. Now the fairy watched while Pinocchio tried to move this way and that with his long nose. Then, when she felt that he had been punished enough for telling lies, she called to a flock of woodpeckers. The birds came in, they perched on his nose, and they began to peck, 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 and at last Pinocchio's nose was down to its right size. "Now," said the fairy, If you promise to be a good boy all the time, you may have one wish. Oh, I wish to be a real boy, cried Pinocchio. You will have your wish presently, said the fairy. Oh, what a good fairy you are, said Pinocchio. Now I must go home to my father, Geppetto. Go then, and be a good boy, and never lie again. Each time you tell a lie, your nose will grow longer, said the fairy, as she kissed him goodbye. Now Pinocchio ran home to Geppetto, who was overjoyed to see him. When Pinocchio awoke the next morning, he found that he was no longer a puppet, but a real boy. Oh, how silly and naughty I was when I was a puppet! How glad I am that now I am a well-behaved boy, said Pinocchio. And you know, from that day on, Pinocchio and Geppetto worked together and played together and lived happily ever after. And that is the story of Pinocchio. And now, boys and girls, stay tuned, and I'll be back in just a moment to show you books from the shelves of your public library. Boys and girls, our bookshelf this morning is made up of some of my favorite book friends. The very first one I want to show you is Madeline. And this is a special edition of Madeline. You can see, that it is a carousel book. And it opens up and it's dimensional. A very nice edition of Madeline. Our next book I had to bring along because it's The Adventures of Robin Hood. And this is a very nice edition of Robin Hood, and it does have some colored illustrations in different chapters, as you can see. And this is a very special edition of The Adventures of Robin Hood, which you can read in chapters at bedtime story hour. Yes, The Adventures of Robin Hood. Our next book is Cinderella, one of my very favorite books. And this is a special edition of Cinderella that I brought along. You see, it's dimensional too. And as you read the pages, the people just seem to pop up, don't they? Yes, here's the beautiful picture with the coach. Yes, this is one of my favorite books, Cinderella. And then I had to bring along Mother Goose. And this is a special edition of Mother Goose. As you can see, here she is and her arm moves. And then we open the pages down below, and here we have Jack be nimble, Jack be quick, Jack jump over the candlestick. Yes, this is Mother Goose rhymes. And then some of you might not know Petunia. Well, Petunia is a goose. And here she is on the very front. Well, now, Petunia has a very strange adventure. She is walking along and she finds a book. And she just doesn't know the significance of a book. And she finally finds out through the pages that a book is very special. And because of her adventures, she decides to learn to read. Yes, this is the book, Petunia. And then I brought along A Child's Garden of Verses because we all love to read poetry. And this is a special edition of this book. And this is very nice to be read at bedtime during your bedtime story hour. All the way through we have beautiful poetry and some colored illustrations. A Child's Garden of Verses. And last of all, I'd like to show you this story, one of the classics, Black Beauty. And if you love horses, this is a wonderful story. And this is a very nice edition with beautiful illustrations too. Yes, boys and girls, this is Black Beauty. Any of these books can be checked out from any of the libraries in the Craven-Pamlico Carteret Regional Library System. Be sure and use your library card this next week to check out some very good books. And now stay tuned, and we'll be back with a favorite story, the story of Cinderella. And now, boys and girls, get ready to listen to the story of Cinderella. Once there was a girl who was as good as she was beautiful. She lived with her stepmother and her two stepsisters. They were cruel to her because she was more beautiful than they. They made her scrub and clean all day long and gave her only rags to wear. And at night she slept in the chimney corner. Because she was always covered with ashes, they called her Cinderella. One day the king's son announced that he was giving a ball, and Cinderella's two stepsisters were invited. They began to choose silks and laces for their ball gowns and jewels and feathers for their hair. They talked of nothing else but how fine they would look at the palace ball. "Oh, you can fix our hair for us," they said to Cinderella. But you know, the different ways that she did, she could not make them more beautiful than she was. "Why don't you go to the ball too, Cinderella?" they asked. The poor girl looked down at her rags and said, "Oh, how I wish I could go." And they laughed at her. With tears in her eyes, Cinderella watched her stepsisters get into their coach and depart for the ball. "Just the same, I wish I could go," she whispered. And at that very moment she heard a voice behind her, and she said, "So you shall, my child." And Cinderella turned around, and there stood a lovely lady with a crown on her head. "I am your fairy godmother," she said, "and I shall prepare you to go to the prince's ball. Run into the garden and get me the biggest pumpkin you can find." Cinderella ran into the garden and brought back the pumpkin, and the fairy waved her wand over the pumpkin, and it was changed instantly into a splendid red coach. "Now we need 6 horses," said the fairy godmother. "Run and fetch the mousetrap." Cinderella brought the mousetrap, and there were 6 lively little mice in the trap. And the fairy waved her wand, and the mice became 6 prancing white horses. "Now we need a coachman," said the fairy. "Bring the rat trap." Cinderella brought the rat trap with one big rat sitting in it. And the fairy waved her wand, and the rat became a coachman, with a coachman's hat and a plume on his head. "We need footmen too," said the fairy. 6 will do. Run and fetch 6 green lizards." And Cinderella brought back the lizards, and the fairy waved her wand, and immediately there were 6 footmen dressed in purple livery, trimmed with gold. "There," said the fairy. "Are you happy now?" "Oh, but my clothes," said Cinderella, looking down at her rags. The fairy godmother laughed gently and touched Cinderella with her wand, and Cinderella's rags fell off, and she was dressed in a magnificent ball gown of golden silk. There were diamonds in her hair, and on her feet twinkled 2 lovely little glass slippers. "And now off to the ball," said the fairy. "But you must remember that the magic ends at midnight. You must be home at 12 o'clock, or you will find yourself again in rags." Cinderella promised to be back at midnight and rode off to the ball. When Cinderella arrived at the ball, everyone whispered, "Oh, what a beautiful princess! I wonder who she is." Even the two stepsisters did not recognize Cinderella, but they were very envious. "The prince dances with no one but her," they said to each other. Indeed, Cinderella and the prince were the handsomest couple on the dance floor, and the prince never left Cinderella's side. When supper was served, he picked out the choicest fruits and cakes for her, and he took Cinderella by the hand and led her to the king and told him that he loved her. Now Cinderella was so happy that she quite forgot about the time. Suddenly, she heard the clock strike the first note of midnight, and quickly she curtsied to the prince, and then she fled from the room and out of the castle. She hurried down the marble steps to her coach. Just as she was about to step into the coach, the last note of 12 sounded. The coach vanished before her eyes, and there on the ground lay a pumpkin. The rat and mice scurried off, and the lizards crawled away in the dust. Cinderella stood there, dressed in rags again. Now the lovely little glass slippers were all that remained, but Cinderella had lost one of the slippers on the marble steps when she hurried down. She limped home on the other slipper and reached the chimney corner before the stepsisters arrived. Now the next morning everyone was awakened by the sound of a bugle. A messenger from the palace called out the news that the prince had found the glass slipper. He was going to take it to every house in the kingdom until he found its owner. And when he found the girl, she would become his bride. All the young ladies in the kingdom were excited. They hurried to put on their best dresses for the prince's visit. But Cinderella had nothing to wear but her rags. The prince went to every house looking for the beautiful girl, and at last he came to Cinderella's house. Cinderella's stepsisters pushed her aside and hurried to try on the slipper. "I think it will fit me," said the older girl, but she could not even squeeze her toes into the tiny slipper. The younger sister had no better luck. When she tried to put the slipper on. "Oh, please let me try," said Cinderella in a shy voice. "You," cried the stepsisters, "go back to your cinders and ashes where you belong." But the prince looked for a long time at Cinderella's lovely face, and he knew he had seen it before. "Let her try," said the prince. Cinderella slipped her foot into the glass slipper easily. Then, to everyone's amazement, she drew the other slipper out of her pocket and put it on her other foot. At that moment the fairy godmother appeared, and with her wand touched Cinderella. There she stood, dressed again in the splendid ball gown. The prince gazed at her with joy and knelt down at her feet. "This is my own true bride," he said. Oh, a great wedding was held. Cinderella was so happy that she forgave her stepsisters. She took them to live with her at the palace, where they married 2 lords. And boys and girls, they all lived happily ever after. And that is the story of Cinderella. We'll be back in just a moment. And now, boys and girls, I have a poem entitled Good Books, Good Times. Good books, good times, good stories, good rhymes, good beginnings, good ends, good people, good friends, good fiction, good facts, good adventures, good acts, good stories, good rhymes, good books, good times. That's a very good poem, isn't it? And now I see, boys and girls, I can remind you to be sure and have a bedtime story hour tonight with your parents, and be sure to tune in to Telestory Time next Saturday morning. Until then, this is Eleanor Hawkins saying bye-bye for Telestory Time.